Hey, it's a shame with the Social Freedom Tribe. I want to do a quick video on the influential yes and. I know I've had videos where I've talked about this and like how to be influential through this whole yes and system of when you're talking to somebody, kind of like taking what they're saying and kind of like agreeing to it and adding on to something that they're saying. And I wanted to talk about like why that is so influential or why I find it influential. I know I was watching this YouTube video this morning and it was an interview and the interviewee kept interrupting the interviewer and kept arguing and disagreeing and things. And I noticed that while watching this video, I just felt really stressed out the whole time. And I rarely ever give a negative YouTube comment. And I found that I was just really compelled to give this negative YouTube comment on this video. And when I added the comment, I noticed that other people were saying similar things. They were noticing like the stress within themselves, the agitation within themselves, the whole inability to zoom into the video and get into a flow and listening to the video because there was this like whole no and interrupting kind of energy, and it was unfortunate. And I noticed that with this whole non-yes and, there was more of a monologue, like more of a speech and more of a rant that this person probably has repeated over and over, and it just didn't feel novel in that moment. I didn't feel like I was seeing something new. And I thought more about this, and I actually realized that it's because a conversation has two different perspectives and that could add together to form this third perspective, this third thing that's novel and new, and that's exciting to see. When two people are really knowledgeable but have different perspectives about some kind of subject, and they're talking in a way that's yes-anding each other, and there's no like stressful interrupting or stressful no, I disagree, bam. Not to say that arguing doesn't have its place, and not to say that you have to always agree, but just noticing that there's a whole creating this third thing, creating this third perspective when two different perspectives combine and yes and each other. And if one person brings something and the other person can respond by agreeing to the essence of what they're saying and then adding on top of that, and then that gets added on top of, then they're co-creating something that's novel, a new third way of doing it. It's not some kind of monologue that's been repeated over and over and over again. And with that, novelty becomes a flow. It becomes this thing where I'm easily able to zoom in and just be fascinated with what these two creative beings are creating together. And I noticed I didn't get it with that video. I heard a monologue and I was pretty bored with it, even though actually the person was very creative and very smart with what they were saying. And so it was really unfortunate. And I noticed that with conversations, actually, where I might be adding something and the person is kind of disagreeing with what I'm bringing, and I try to yes and on top of that, but it just doesn't have the same effect where we can co-create something that's just incredible. I feel larger than myself in those moments where I'm finally able to co-create a conversation with the whole yes and system. And I also I've kept these notebooks and I've kept notes on all of the books that I've read since I've been about 22 or so. And I'm 28 now, so it's been about 6 years of notes. I have like these 3 different notebooks where I learn something that is paradigm shifting and I write it down in the notebook so that I have it to come back to. The reason I do that is because I read this book called The Social Animal by David Brooks, where he talks about reach and reciprocity, where the basis of it is basically we have this core knowledge and we reach and find new knowledge, new perspectives, and then we come back to our core. And as babies, apparently that's our mother's face. So we might be playing with a toy in a room, and it's a new toy, we learn some things, we crawl over and we just look at our mother's face real quick. Got it. Here's like the core knowledge, and I just reached and grabbed something new and added it to the core knowledge. And what I realized after I reread this concept and reread other things about how when two neurons fire at the same time, there forms a connection, and whenever one then fires after, the other one then fires. I started realizing that that is kind of the basis of yes and, where this is a really influential ability of yes anding, because you're taking somebody's core beliefs and you're adding on top of that. You're giving them the reach that is helping them fire a different neuron and find a different connection that they might have not seen before when it comes to their core knowledge. So let's say that there's a new area of expertise, a new domain that you might not know as much about. Let's say it's tennis, and maybe you already know about basketball. So if I were to explain tennis to you as this brand new thing, it might be more difficult than if I built off of what you already knew from basketball and say that, hey, just like basketball, tennis has this starting position that before you hit, you start at this exact kind of thing with your knees bent and blah, blah, blah. Just like how basketball, you have the triple threat. And it's like, got it. Okay, cool. I have this now. I have this connection to something that I already know. I have this core knowledge that is connected to this reached out knowledge. And the reached out knowledge is now able to be added. So you can do this whole yes and system, and somebody is saying something that they really believe in, they really know a lot about, and you can add on top of that by, first of all, not doing a whole stressful no and arguing, and they're feeling stressed out and like, oh, you're telling me I'm wrong, and they get defensive and stuff like that. You can bypass the whole defensive system, and you can hear and understand their perspective and what they're saying and their beliefs, and you don't even have to actually agree. You just don't disagree. Basically, you can say something that's the exact opposite and still yes and somebody. But what you do is you just add on top of that. Once they're not in a defensive state with what they're bringing, they feel like they're being heard and they feel like they're being understood, then there's a time where you can add something on top of that, and they build this connection, and these different neurons fire in their brains and form a connection. Now whenever they're thinking about basketball, they might have this connection to tennis that they now see, and they're now thinking about form and different things like that. And you can just really have this high influential ability by co-creating this new novel third perspective that is the combination of the two of your perspectives. And I noticed that I felt stressed out when I didn't get that whole yes and system between these two intelligent, creative individuals, and I noticed that there was a lot of comments that agreed with what I was saying, where basically they're like, I'm not wanting to hear just one person rant while interrupting the other person. I want to hear a conversation that's creative and co-creative. And so I really felt inspired about this. And I also felt inspired just rereading my notes about reach and reciprocity and the neurons connecting and things like that, where I realized there was a connection. That was me doing reach and reciprocity. Yes-anding is something that's new to me, and when I went back into my notes and saw things about reach and reciprocity and the neurons connecting, I was like, okay. And I made a new connection with the whole yes and that's just really fascinating to me. It's really something that excites me when I build these connections, and it can be an exciting conversation that puts us into flow. And I think the dangers of that are, I have another video, the dangers of being zoomed in, and I might redo that because actually I found that when I was listening to it, I said like a lot, which I'm trying to be conscious of not saying, and it's kind of like this whole interrupting thing where while I was listening to my own video, I was trying to be zoomed into what I was saying, but every time the word like came up, it just jolted me and zoomed me out, and I wasn't able to be that kind of influential person to myself, basically, because I find that influence has a lot to do with that whole zoomed in flow kind of state where it's co-creative and yes-anding, and or even if you're just listening to music or just watching a video, if you're listening to music and there's a whole set rhythm and you catch that rhythm and you're in it, and then the YouTube video starts buffering or something like that, and it's just jolting and it zooms us out. So I noticed that with my videos, and there's the same kind of effect when we're no or not yes-anding somebody, and we don't have to actually agree with what they're saying to yes and it. We just have to change our language in a way that doesn't cause defensiveness in the other person. And so I hope that makes sense, and I hope that you can see the connection between how we connect things in our brain. And I also, just as a side note, I highly recommend going back to a book that was a paradigm shifting book for you, and especially if you haven't read it in many years, if you reread it, you will probably make connections with the things that you've learned recently with that old book that you made paradigm shifts with. And the things that you've recently learned will probably make way more sense and be way more grounded in your core knowledge going back to that kind of stuff. And same thing with yes-anding conversations about things that you already know. Kind of just like try to add in other perspectives, because that can also add a lot of creativity, is not just yes-anding people to influence them, but allowing yourself to be influenced by talking about these things and then hearing other people's perspectives on those things that are bringing, and hopefully you can find somebody who's yes-anding. I know there's a lot of people that their whole conversational structure is to interrupt, and that I find that stressful. I would recommend just practicing firm boundaries with those people, and then also just avoiding them, if anything. I mean, hopefully you have enough choices in friends that you can surround yourself with just really positive, building up kind of friends rather than these stressful, interrupting friends. I would say building strong boundaries with people that you're working with, or just people that you're forced around to be around, can be really helpful in a way that it's like, hey, I had something to say, can I finish? Just like having boundaries is an incredible thing with people that are interrupting a lot. And if somebody is arguing with you a lot or anything, that's kind of harder to have a boundary around. However, you could give them feedback and let them know in a non-triggering, non-defensive making way. And also just really just look for people that are those co-creative people that you tend to get into a flow state with. Because I just noticed that I get so much more knowledge just from having a co-creative conversation that I really look forward to with somebody than having this whole argumentative monologue thing, or even reading books. Like I read books to get this sense of data that I can bring to these flow state conversations, but it's when I have those conversations that are just yes-anding and building off of each other, then I just start learning so much, and I try to bring these things that I learned from books, and when I hear people bring their things that they've learned from books and their perspectives, and then it all builds off each other, it's just really co-creative, and it's really incredible. I look forward to these conversations, and I hold on to people that I have these conversations with. Roy Gatterman, Zahn, and all Aaron, and all these people that are just really co-creative. Nick Blum, and I love all of you guys. Greg Helms, wow, that was incredible conversation. I've had these co-creative conversations with people, and I just look forward to it. A lot of what I'm saying now is partly from the books that I've read and different perspectives that I've gained in my own life, built off of all of these constant conversations that I've had with people that are just really co-creative in my life, and we build off each other, and we really help each other build these perspectives that are really unique and creative. And it's just so powerful. And I noticed that when I have these, the more I have these conversations, the more I'm just motivated to read. And I find it really unfortunate when people don't have that motivation to read, because it just tells me that they don't have those friends that they can really build a conversation off. Because if we're reading and we're just like, I'm not gaining any from this, I don't see the point of reading, it's really sad to me, because there's such amazing conversations we can have with this kind of knowledge, where we're taking this data and memorizing it, and then we have it as a data point, but then, or as a neuron, or whatever, and we're just able to make these connections, and that's just like the exciting moment of creating a connection. I know rereading my notebook, which I'm finally doing again. I avoid it for a long time, but every once a year or so I try to reread my notebooks, and then bam, creative connection after creative connection happens. It's incredible. And I love these whole co-creative conversations, because I do that same thing constantly. And I memorize all these quotes just because I have so many connections, and I talk about the quotes a lot with different people, and I hear their perspectives and how they're interpreting it, and how they're implying it in their life, and like all the things that's going on with them, and how it's applied, how that has affected, or the patterns that they've seen. And it's just really incredible, and I hope that for everybody, because reading is just really exciting if we can find a way to make it exciting and get us into flow with these conversations. So, love you guys, and I hope this helps. I hope this really motivates you to learn and be creative and have co-creative conversations where both of you are being really influenced in a positive way. All right, have fun. Peace.